So one answer that I can tell you, because I once gave a sermon on that, is that, God is saying, don't go alone. You're not going alone. You're coming with me.
Oh, that's nice.
Uh-huh. So, you can take from that whatever you think is appropriate, but, I'm sure there are plenty of times when you don't want to go alone.
Well, least of all to Pharaoh.
Or to any of his assistants. And there are plenty of them scattered all about.
All about the centuries.
Yeah. So let's show everybody what we have for folks tonight. And here it is, right? This is from near the end of the Parsha. This is one of the less famous parts of the Parsha, but it's very important because it's all about tefillin, right? So what do the verses say? And by the way, these are two of the little parchments. These are two of the verses that are put in the parchments of the tefillin. Okay?
How many parchments are there?
4.
And what are
there
the
are
other
4
3?
different verses. The other 2 are the Parshiot from the Shema, which also mentioned tefillin. Okay? So
both the third paragraph and the first paragraph?
No, the first 2 paragraphs, the Ahavta and Vahayim Shemoah. The third paragraph, the Vayomer, that's the one with the tzitzit.
Well, that should be there too, shouldn't it?
In the tefillin? I don't think so.
No. The tzitzit refer to the talid.
Right. So the tzitzit are right there and visible on the corners of the talid, but you don't need them in the tefillin.
Mute yourself.
When you want the ones about the tefillin in the tefillin?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the first part of your sentence, Ann.
Did the tefillin contain the one that says tefillin?
They contain the 4 that say tefillin. Okay?
Rabbi, what would be the English translation of tefillin?
There isn't any.
There isn't a good translation. The one that you see here and there is the word phylacteries.
That comes from a Greek word that means amulet.
But tefillin are not amulets.
That's
They're
right.
not intended in any way to be a protective device like an amulet is, right?
Mhm.
The best translation of phylacteries is tefillin.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's one of those words that can't be translated. You have to use the word itself, like Shabbat.
Well, you have, I could show you the translation, right? But, you already know what they look like.
Correct.
Pretty sure. Okay. So here it is. And this shall serve you as a sign on your hand. Of course, it's not on your hand, it's on your arm, but okay. And as a reminder on your forehead, in order that the teachings of the Lord may be in your mouth, that with a mighty hand the Lord freed you from Egypt. And then the second verse, and so it shall be as a sign upon your hand and as a symbol on your forehead, that with a mighty hand the Lord freed us from Egypt. So what do you get from this? Just from the verses. What's the purpose of tefillin?
To remind you
Of
Hashem taking us out of Egypt.
Yes.
That is it. Now, I tell you, there are a lot of days I put on my tefillin and the Exodus is not the first thing I think of. Right? But, you're going to come to it sooner or later in the service. So it's never too far away in the Siddur, right? So this is one of the major themes with the tefillin, the fact that it's all about the Exodus, right? Hence, this first passage from this midrashic work, the Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael, which says, this is not a symbolic statement. It is a directive. There's nothing symbolic about this. It's pshat. It's very straightforward. It tells you to write these passages, bind them on the head and on the arm. With a mighty hand, the Lord freed you from Egypt. Hence, we learn that the purpose of tefillin is to remind us of the Exodus.
Okay.
Now, there are lots of details about the tefillin, and we'll come to some of those later on. But this is the basic piece. Yes, Ronnie?
Okay. When did it become a custom to lay tefillin?
Well, we have evidence that tefillin existed in the time of the Second Temple. How far back, I can't say exactly, but certainly in the, at least the first century before the Common Era.
So this is a very, very old practice.
Yes, and it developed out of these texts and the other two.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm in class now.
Yes. All right. So
Call back up
next,
tomorrow.
let's take a look at what Rashi's grandson Rashbam says. Okay? The straightforward meaning of this command is that the Exodus should forever be in a Jew's thoughts, as if its description were inscribed on his arm, similar to the metaphorical verse, "Set me as a seal upon your heart." Now, that verse is from Song of Songs. Song of Songs is a love poem, right? So it doesn't really mean, set me as, put me on your heart and, glue me up. That's not what it means. But it's a metaphor, right? That I should always, that you should love me and honor me so much that I would always be attached to you, that you would always think of me, right? And so similarly with the tefillin, the Exodus is a pretty constant theme. And if you think of the number of times in the daily service that the Exodus is mentioned, that it's pretty clear that whoever put together this Siddur certainly wanted to have the Exodus on our minds a lot during the day. Yes, Ronnie?
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay.
Don't apologize. You haven't done anything.
Because I'm going to ask a question that may make some people angry.
Questions that would cross a rabbi's eyes.
Where does it say in the Siddur that only men do tefillin?
It doesn't say it. Now, how did they derive that it was only commanded for men to do it?
Right.
The answer is all positive mitzvot, which had a specific time for which they were to be done, were considered to be mitzvot from which women were exempt.
But there's a lot of exceptions to that rule on both sides.
There are exceptions, but that is the rule, and tefillin is not considered an exception to that. Now, it was a very interesting thing when the conservative movement, which certainly subscribes to the idea that you should wear tefillin every day, when we started ordaining women. So, we couldn't, it was pretty hard to imagine a rabbi who didn't feel compelled to put on tefillin every day, right? So there was a proposal at that time, and this is over 30 years ago. I might be a little fuzzy on the details, but the proposal was that all women going into the rabbinical school should agree to voluntarily accept all the mitzvot, even those from which women were customarily exempt, with the exception of certain times, such as, childbirth, right?
The Orthodox community did not agree to that.
Correct.
Of course not.
Because in the Orthodox world, it's hard to get any changes done.
But they do change gradually.
Right.
They're doing things now different than what they did 30 years ago. And there
Actually,
have been women who were ordained as rabbis too, by Orthodox rabbis.
There have been some changes. Unfortunately, there's a tremendous resistance to the most important changes. So for instance, the RCA, which is the mainstream so-called modern Orthodox rabbinate, has totally rejected women as rabbis, will not accept ordained women as members of the RCA. And in some ways, even more troubling than that, they've never been willing to apply a resolution to the problem of divorce.
Oh,
Women who were essentially stuck in marriage, unable to remarry because they weren't willing to set up a mechanism that would free them if the husband refused to divorce her.
They had a mechanism in Rashi's time. Why can't they have it
Well,
now?
I'm sorry, Rashi's not around to tell us about it, and to if Rashi were around today, I'm sure there are Orthodox Jews who would say, he wasn't that important.
really?
Because after all, if you're around today, how much authority do you have to change things that have existed for centuries and centuries? You should be ashamed of yourself even for suggesting it.
Yeah, but if they were doing it then, why did they change it? Why did they become worse instead
Because
of
it
better?
wasn't accepted outside of his circle.
Hmm. So if you were to go to a modern Orthodox shul as a woman and you wanted to put on tefillin, you would probably be told that was not acceptable.
Yeah, it depends on the synagogue. I'm sure there are Orthodox synagogues today where they are more liberal, more accepting of that. But I think, I use this phrase advisedly, the average Orthodox synagogue probably would resist that idea.
And
Right.
Now, some people might be more polite than others. Some places, I would be concerned for a woman's safety if she were to go do it.
Mm.
Other
Rabbi
people,
Radinsky permitted women to put on whatever they wanted in the daily morning service.
yeah,
But in the class in Talmud, which he gave after the service, he acknowledged that he didn't like it, but he just permitted it.
well, but Rabbi Radinsky, Olav Shalom, was much too much of a gentleman to do anything that he thought might be hurtful to
He
someone.
was a wonderful man.
Wonderful man.
Yeah.
Oh my
And,
God. Man.
So I, he's one of those guys who, even if he didn't like it, he would wait until everyone was gone to tell the woman that he didn't like it.
Right. Wonderful man.
And he would probably say, it's your choice, but I'm not comfortable with it. Now, and I cannot tell you, I've never discussed it with Rabbi Gelman, so I don't know what he would say. But I think I can tell you what Rabbi Wender would say. And frankly, most women who do want to put on tefillin probably would not go to Rabbi Wender's Young Israel Synagogue.
Right.
I know, I'm sure they wouldn't. Because he
Rabbi?
probably wouldn't let him.
Yes, Barbara?
The Women's League for Conservative Judaism actually encourages women to lay tefillin and teaches them to do it. Rabbi Ford wears tefillin.
Yes. Yes. So that's the difference between the conservative movement and the Orthodox world.
It's
Not
one
that,
of the different.
not that the Orthodox world is, everybody's one flavor. There are many flavors of Orthodoxy. But yeah, in the conservative movement, by and large, it is accepted. And even in many congregations, encouraged for women to put on tefillin.
You think she lays tefillin?
In fact, in conservative Judaism, women wear talit, and Reform, they're starting to wear talit.
Yeah, I think that's been true in Reform Judaism for a while. I think Reform Judaism, especially since a lot of conservative Jews went over there, they got over their allergy to traditional ritual.
Orthodox like to point out that in the Reformed congregation, you're likely to have the women wearing all that and the men not.
Well, I don't know about the Orthodox, but I think it's probably true that women who were never told to wear tefillin when they were young are more willing to embrace it as a part of their natural Jewish growth than men who never totally were comfortable with it in the first place.
I'm sure you're right. It's just, it can be looked at as ironic, especially if you think
Yes.
it should be the other way
Yes.
around.
Yes. Okay. Other questions or comments before we go forward? All right. I want to show you this teaching from Ha'emek Davar. Okay? The avoidance of leavened bread and the consumption of matzah during the 7 days of Pesach are insufficient to instill a belief in providence in Israel's hearts. For that, we require a daily reminder and sign that God is master of the universe. This may be compared to a man who teaches his son an important life lesson and then proceeds to give him subtle and regular reminders of that message. After a year and on an annual basis, the father once again reviews the entire lesson for his child. Similarly, we are commanded to discuss the Exodus at great length during the Passover festival, but to maintain abridged forms of the story throughout the intervening months. These are to be affixed on the arm and the head, parts of the body signifying a person's physical and mental submission to God. So what are the different things we get from this?
I hate the word submission.
Oh, well, yeah, if you prefer, acquiescence.
Better.
Yeah, because in the Hebrew, it doesn't have the, it doesn't have the connotation that it has in English of, like becoming a slave,
Right.
right? Because that's, being an observant Jew is not slavery.
Correct. It's
Well,
If it's not a free choice, it's not a mitzvah.
Well, in the Haggadah, we are commanded to teach the child the story of the Exodus, and the Haggadah becomes a retelling of that story. And then in the daily service, there are abridged portions to remind you, particularly the incident at the Red Sea.
Yes. So that's exactly the point of Ha'emek Davar, that you get these regular reminders, except they're not so subtle, but regular reminders of the Exodus, like all the time.
Actually, everything about being Torah true is about remembering the Exodus.
Well, that's one of the biggest and most frequent mitzvot. Right? So, so that is a major piece of this teaching, right? The idea that you have every day reminders and signs so that we keep in our hearts the idea that, number one, God took us out of Egypt, and number two, God is in charge.
But
Rabbi?
we were slaves.
Yes. Was that Dale?
It was Daniel, I think. Maybe it
Oh,
was
hi,
Del.
Daniel. Yeah,
Hi.
because you weren't on my screen a second ago.
It's all right.
Carry on.
I don't know what to make of this. In the last sentence of the one that we're reading right now, I started to bring this up earlier. It strikes me, it is affixed to the arm and head, parts of the body signifying a person's physical and mental submission to God.
Good.
The word is that bothers me is signifying. Sometimes our religious practices, if you're wearing tefillin to make a political statement or to advertise your firmness versus to actually think about what's in those scrolls and what they say.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think that Haimek Davar is quite saying that. I think he's directly saying that the arm signifies action, physical action. The head signifies your brain and what your brain tells you to do. Right? So that's why the tefillin are put on the arm and the head.
Okay, so I'm rereading this now, and maybe I misunderstood the sentence. It said these are to be affixed. And if you just stop right there and skip to signifying, in other words, it's the affixing, it's the wearing, it's not the arm and head.
Yeah. So what's the thing that is signifying? It's the arm and the head.
Okay, so that's modifying arm and head and not the action of affixing.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Never mind.
Okay.
It kind of reminds me, though, I mean, so much of what we do is to signify what tribe we're in. You know, I mean, we wear a kippah, and if we do wear a kippah outside versus only when we're in the house versus only when we're doing something that involves a bracha or some kind of worship. We wear tefillin sometimes for, you know, it's or wearing tzitzit. These are all signs about which denomination or practice or sect or tribe you have within Judaism. And I'm just voicing a disappointment with how much time we spend doing things to be identified by others.
I think it's to
Well,
remind ourselves.
let me respond to Daniel because I had to go through this process because, you know, since I didn't grow up observant, right? I had to figure out what I was going to do and how I was going to do it. And it didn't always come in a logical order. So, for instance, I wore a kippah before I ever started putting on tefillin, at least, you know, on a daily basis, right? Because, yeah, even though I was beginning to take on observance, putting on a kippah was a way of saying that, you know, yes, I identify with the tribe, but also that I identified with that process. Oh, because I had never not identified with the tribe, you know, always identified as a Jew, never, you know, had any reason or desire not to do that, but I didn't always play the part, right? So as I was beginning to play the part, yeah, I started wearing a yarmulke. So, it was not a consistent process, and it wasn't, I mean, and kippah is really just a minhag. It's just a custom, and it really became considered a regular part of Jewish life after tefillin came along, and after people were wearing tefillin.
Oh,
We have no knowledge of it, but it's very possible that the first Jews who wore tefillin didn't wear a yarmulke. Right?
did you know that?
Nowadays, the Orthodox world just assumes that, well, we've always done it this way, right? We always, men wear kippah, right? It's like, there's a verse that someone once said proved that Jacob wore a kippah, right? Our ancestor Jacob, what's the verse? It says, he went out from Beersheba and went to Haran. Doesn't say anything about a kippah there, but he says, well, you imagine that Jacob, our patriarch, would have traveled all that way without covering his head?
Well,
Understand
let
that's a
me
very
make clear, Rabbi, what I like about your lesson is what I was taught early was that sometimes you do it and then you'll feel what it means later. But you're never going to feel what it means if you never do it.
That's
So
right.
sometimes you just
Right.
do it. Maybe not for that's the best
the
reason.
more you do, and sometimes even little things. Some of you may remember I gave a talk on Shavuot a few years ago. The theme was halacha, okay? That was the Tikkun Leil Shavuot. And I told this story, I remember it right. When I was 19, I went to a summer encampment for a week. And the theme of that encampment was halacha. And the guy who was the scholar in residence was a teacher by the name of Joel Roth, who is, I think, now retired, but he still is listed as faculty at the Jewish Theological Seminary. Okay. He was a lot younger then. Me too. So he began by telling a story to illustrate the pervasiveness of Jewish law in every aspect of life. And I was interested because I was, beginning to think about becoming more observant, and I was a youth leader, so I was thinking about having to be more of an example, and et cetera, et cetera. So here's the example he gave. He said that in general, if it's a choice between right and left, right takes precedence in Judaism. And to some degree that has to do with Kabbalah, but I won't go into the details of it. Right? There's an exception. Anything that involves knots. Why? Because with knots, if you're right-handed, you put the tefillin on your left arm.
Closer to the heart.
I'm sorry? Yeah.
Closer
Right.
to the heart.
So the little doodad points to the heart. So he said, this is how traditional Jews put on their shoes. Right? You put the right shoe on, you put the left shoe on. You tie the left shoe, you tie the right shoe. That's the order. And that's a way of affirming a principle in halakha. Okay? Now, I realized, and he didn't claim that this was the most important mitzvah in Judaism. And I said, okay, I understand that. I understand maybe that's not as big as Shabbos or Kashrus or anything like that. But you know what? I want to see if I can discipline myself to do it. right? And so at that summer, and probably that week, I started putting on my shoes that way, right? And I've been doing it that way ever since, right? And sometimes just, one little thing stays with you and makes a difference. And I don't mention it again because it was so important in and of itself, but because it gave me confidence that if I could do that, I could do more important things too, that I hadn't done to date. Okay. So, that's just an interesting piece. Yeah, Jerry.
My parents were from Europe, and they had, I don't know if it's a superstition or what, but they said that the left side was the Sidra Achar, and they didn't want me to be left-handed when I was growing up.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, that's a big thing in Kabbalah. That the left side is the bad side. Had some unfortunate effects. Okay.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
That means I was having trouble with the baseball glove on the left hand.
But that's good. You had your right hand free to throw.
No, but this was actually, I don't know if, it was a superstition. My mother and father actually tied my left hand when I was little.
Oh, yeah. Well, it didn't start out as a superstition. Okay. I think it became one by people who didn't necessarily understand where it came from.
So it's supposed to be a sign to us when we do it, not to show off to other people. We do it when you're home alone. Daddy always davened with talis and tefillin and a kippah. He didn't have anybody to show it to. He did it because he wanted to feel it.
Well, that's true. And there may have been reasons why he didn't do it in the synagogue.
He did it in the synagogue
However,
too, whenever he could get there.
Right.
He worked 12 hours a day.
Yeah. So I would say that in general, the halakha is it's preferable to do it in the synagogue. But the
you
most
didn't wait to get to the synagogue to put your shoes on.
Thank you, Ann. The important thing is to do it.
Okay, I've got, who is he?
Who he? Where?
Who?
Which one of us are you talking to?
I don't, Ann said he. Who is
my
the
father?
Oh, your
She's
father.
talking about her father.
Okay, I didn't know who he was. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions or comments before we dive ahead? Because we haven't gotten too far here.
No, but that's okay.
Well, I hope so. So here's this little piece from the 20th century Dean of Modern Orthodoxy, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik. He says, sanctity and slavery are mutually contradictory. Slavery is rooted in the profane, in impurity, in the unworthy. It cannot be paired with holiness and with the spiritual fitness of the personality. That is why the holiness of a slave who immersed himself for the purpose of being a slave is defective. That is why the slave's testimony is unacceptable. He cannot contract a marriage because the ability to betroth stems from having a hallowed personality, meaning an independent personality. The moment a slave achieves personal sanctity, his slavery is annulled. The halakha expresses this idea very nicely. A slave whose master placed tefillin upon him goes free. Why? Because slavery cannot harmonize with the proclamation of God's unity and the acceptance of God's commandments expressed in the 4 passages contained in the film. In other words, a slave cannot accept the mitzvot.
So he took us out of Egypt so that we would be able to serve him rather than the Egyptians.
Correct.
Yes, but slavery is something that you don't, it's put upon you. It's not something you say, oh, I would love to be a slave. Wouldn't that be fun?
Well,
So when it-
Ronnie, you may be aware that the Torah sanctions what is really a form of slavery. It's called indentured
Indentured servants, correct, but you can earn your freedom.
Yes, but sometimes people did voluntarily submit themselves to this, maybe because their family needed money.
Okay.
They would voluntarily give up their freedom for a certain period of time.
When the Hebrews were in Egypt, it was not voluntarily. They were
Correct.
slaves because
Correct.
Pharaoh made them slaves.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, you know,
Barbara, were you trying to say something?
sanctity and slavery are mutually contradictory, but if slavery is not your choice, I don't agree with that.
That's why the Exodus was so important, because it had to transform the Israelites, their mentality, their slave mentality, into one to accept the sanctity of God and to believe that God is going to take care of them. So they had
That's exactly the
a
point.
version of tefillin when the ideas, these were the steps that they had to take to become free men. And when they didn't take these steps, then God got angry and said, you're not going anyplace. We're going to let you die, your generation die out, and bring up the new generation who knew not slavery, and they could then accept my sanctity and live in the promised land.
I understand that, but slavery was not an option. They
No.
were slaves because Pharaoh made them slaves. It was not an option. They couldn't decide between.
Well, Ronnie, nobody here would debate that was totally wrong. Right? What Soloveitchik is saying here is that you can't function as a holy personality if you're not an independent personality. If you're only a means to someone else's end,
Correct.
then you can't grab hold of holiness yourself. In the abstract, of course, and in the reality of the world, everybody is holy. Everybody is created in God's image. But if you're a slave, you don't get that in any practical sense.
I'm just saying slavery was not an option. It wasn't like they were offered.
Yeah, but Soloveitchik knows that, Ronnie.
Yes, is a way of, having money for your family, whatever. Slavery was not an option. Therefore, it's not contradictory because you weren't given the choice.
But you were prevented from being holy because you couldn't choose to obey God when you were forced to obey your master.
Yeah. So Ronnie, I'll give you this.
I'm not getting this.
Yeah, Ronnie, what you're saying is correct insofar as having made someone a slave does not mean that they lose their sanctity in the eyes of God.
Okay.
Right? What it means, however, is that for practical purposes, you don't get to function as an independent personality.
Correct.
You cannot take advantage of that holiness and function as someone who, let's say, worships God or fulfills mitzvot, because you don't have that choice.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
I am going to skip this long piece from Ramban, from Nachmanides, because we don't have time for it. Yeah. So, but a really interesting piece here from Shmuel David Luzzatto. Ancient cultures had a custom observable today in some Eastern societies of adorning their bodies with signs of fealty to their gods. Really, amulets. That was mentioned earlier, right? Tefillin are not amulets, but these were. And furthermore, modern Arabs, at least Luzzatto believed that, I don't know if it's true, maintain a practice of copying verses from their scriptures directly onto their skin. They record their holy lines on doorways and city gates. Some scholars claim that the ancients would customarily carry tablets on their foreheads or permanently record pronouncements on their bodies, tattoos, I guess, as amulets against witchcraft. But in an effort to distance his people from such severe behavior, God commanded Israel merely to wear some Torah excerpts on our arms and heads. These are intended as constant reminders of the whole of God's word, such that we and our children will forever think about God's message. So this is like an offshoot of what we've seen before. You know, the tefillin are there to remind us of the Exodus. Here, it's really a reminder of the entire Torah.
Mezuzahs too.
Yeah, well, mezuzahs are a reminder that the Torah is binding both when you go out and when you come in.
Yes, and it's also customary among a lot of people to have it on every doorpost except the bathroom in the house.
Right, right.
So that's
room-
not to advertise it to anybody outside. It's
Right.
to remind us.
Yes, yes. Okay, other comments, questions, observations? Okay,
Okay, Rabbi,
yes, yes, Jerry.
when they were slaves in Egypt, the Levites were not slaves, right? They were
It's
Why
not
not?
clear, that was the case.
because that's what I heard. So that's why they have the
Well,
special status.
I
never
think
heard
that's kind of a way to try to boost the status of Moses' family
Mhm.
and to suggest that there was something different about them. And maybe that's why Moses became Moses. Hold on, Ann. I see your hand. But, you know, I'm not clear that the Levites actually were not slaves. Yes, Ann.
Oh,
If the Levites were not slaves, then why did she have to hide her baby and put him in the box?
Right.
She was just as vulnerable as the non-Levites.
Right. So that's why I say I don't see any evidence that they had a higher status. Okay, so the most of the rest of this, and we'll see one more here actually, but most of the rest of this has to do with laws that were derived from these teachings about the tefillin. But this last thing from Abarbanel is interesting. The Torah here instructs its readers to place the current passage in the tefillin of the arm and the head. Such a practice will serve as a constant reminder of the Exodus from Egypt, which God brought about with a mighty hand. In turn, the wearers of this signs will never forget the wonders God performed for us. This will ensure that we continue to believe in God's providence and powers. So there's a little bit of a leap of faith there. And the leap of faith is put on the tefillin, and they will always remind you that God is real, that God did the Exodus, that God is our God. Now, obviously, the tefillin don't prove anything. I would say historically, they've been fairly effective at that. Again, Daniel, it's a case of, you do the mitzvah, and then it inspires you, rather than being inspired to do the mitzvah and then doing it.
That's what I was thinking.
I've heard it said that when the Hasidim and the Lubavitchers stop a man on the street and say, "Are you Jewish?" and he says, "Yes, but I'm not observant," and they don't understand what that means.
What?
That he doesn't want to do it, but they do it to him anyway. And he
Well,
bursts into tears.
no, and
That's what I've heard them say,
well,
whether it's true or not.
I don't know that it's true. I have never heard anyone tell me that the Chabadniks forced them to put on tefillin, and they're very
I didn't say
consistent.
forced. I didn't
Excuse
say
me.
forced.
Excuse me. They're very consistent about how they do things, because the shlichim, the people who serve as emissaries for Chabad, they're trained in all these ways. They will never coerce someone to put on tefillin. What they will do is encourage them, invite them, assist them.
What was it in Paris?
But I didn't say they forced them.
Not Jerusalem. Where was it?
I never
Somewhere.
said that.
Okay,
And
Ann.
the point
Okay,
was that the
it's
point
fine.
wasn't.
It's
Mm.
fine. That's not the central part of my point. I've never heard them of any Chabadnik who
No, but-
coerced
In
someone
Paris.
to do it.
And I didn't say they did.
Well, I'm not clear what you were saying then.
What I'm saying is that having had the thing wrapped around him, he spontaneously burst into tears.
Oh, that was his reaction.
Yes.
Well, it's
Paris, we went to
look,
that
we
kosher.
all respond to religious moments in different ways.
Mhm.
But he had never even seen it before, and it affected him that way.
Uh-huh. Well, I'll tell you an interesting story, and I read this in a speech that Heschel student, my teacher, Dr. Byron Sherwin, Oliver Shalom, told. Heschel went to Chicago to speak at a conference at a university. And there was an academic who was asked to pick him up at the airport. The academic happened to be Jewish, but didn't affiliate as Jewish anyway. And he didn't really want to do it. He asked the head of the department who asked him to do it. He said, "Why are you asking me to pick up Dr. Heschel?" He says, "Well, you're Jewish, you'll find something to talk about." And they did, of course, because Heschel had a way of connecting with such people and talking, and relating to their experiences. A couple of weeks after Heschel goes back to New York, the guy gets a package in the mail. Heschel had bought and sent him a pair of tefillin.
Ooh,
Wow, that was so generous.
And yeah, because it's not cheap,
no.
right? It probably cost a lot less back then, but it was not cheap. So, so the guy became much more connected and basically started putting on tefillin on a regular basis.
Interesting.
Wow.
So Chabad didn't invent that outreach stuff.
But there-
Okay, now we come to all these laws, right? And we're not going to have time for all this, but we'll do a little bit of it. So tefillin are worn as a sign, right? It says ot he. It is a sign.
Oh, sign.
Yeah.
It.
Yes. So since they are worn as a sign, they are not worn on days that are themselves referred to as signs, such as festivals and Shabbat. So for instance, many of you know the verse, Ot Hi Leolam. The Shabbat is an eternal sign. Festivals also are referred to as an ot, a sign. So Jerusalem Talmud says, we don't wear tefillin on days when we already have a sign. Next, from Rashi, the Hebrew term yadcha in one of these two verses has a standard spelling. In the second one, it has an extra hey at the end. And if you have an extra hey in the word yadcha, you can take the letters and not rearrange them, but just divide them into the words yad keha, the weaker arm. Hence, the rule that the tefillin should be worn on the weaker arm. And that's true. Left-handers wear their tefillin on the right arm.
Oh,
Okay. Next, from Kliyakar. Let me fix this so that the whole thing appears on one page. Right? What this teaches is that military success is not a function of brute strength, but is always due to the assistance granted by God. For the hand of man is always weak and ineffectual. Were God not to take man by the hand and lead him to success, people would never really accomplish anything great or small. It is not one's own right hand that gives him strength, because man, in fact, depends on the right hand of God to prop up his weak left.
yeah.
That is why God commanded Jews to don tefillin on the left arm, to wear a symbol containing the name of God within it. This demonstrates that the power of God placed on the left arm provides the power to that limb, meaning to the weaker limb. Right? It's particularly interesting how the tradition takes these verses and leads us to different understandings of them. Right?
I don't agree with that.
Right? Next. Okay, the Torah presents the Shel Yad before the Shel Rosh because of what the two objects symbolize. Right? In other words, in the verses that we saw, the Shel Yad, the tefillin for the arm, is mentioned before the tefillin for the head, the Shel Rosh. Right? What do they symbolize? When one wears the Shel Yad, he demonstrates that he has mastered his desires and is in full control of his passions, meaning the passions that, move you to act. Right? The Shel Rosh, the headpiece, signifies purity of thought and contemplation. For such is the process of character development. First, a person must wage an inner war against his evil impulses, and only then can he turn his eyes upward to contemplate God. Okay? So, very nice teaching here. Right? That you have to manage yourself sufficiently before you can grow spiritually. Okay? Next, from the Midrash on Psalms. Rabbi Eliezer taught that tefillin were only to be worn in the daytime. For the following verse says, you shall keep this law at its set time, miyamim yamima. From year to year, literally though, yom is singular, yamim is plural. So yom means day, literally from days to days. Okay? So you only wear them, he derives from this, the idea that you only wear them in the daytime. How then, he asked, shall I fulfill the obligation of the verse, he studies that Torah day and night. Rabbi Joshua said, through the recitation of Shema. For if a person does this morning and evening, God considers it as if he had labored in Torah day and night. So again, a very nice teaching derived from the verses. We wear them in the daytime, but you have other ways to show your loyalty to the Torah at other times. Okay? Next, from the Midrash Lekach. The word ot in this verse is written without a vav. Sometimes you have a vav to represent the vowel o with a dot above it, and sometimes you don't have the vav, you just have the dot, right? You all read Hebrew, so you know this. Okay? Now, the interesting thing is that in our text, they both have a vav, but the author of this midrash had a different Torah. He had a Torah where the word ot in one place appeared with a vav and one without. Right? And so he derived from this yet another law. From this, we learn that the 4 passages contained within the Tefillin Shel Yad should be written on a single parchment and placed within a single compartment. The sign is for you. Daniel, this should appeal to you. The sign is for you, for the person wearing the tefillin, and not for others. One should not wave the tefillin about and show it off to the world. Wear it with modesty. The order teaches us that one should first put on the tefillin shel yad, and after that affix the tefillin shel rosh. And when they are removed, it's the reverse. The shel rosh is removed first.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Wait a minute, I didn't get that. They said you're supposed to put the hand first.
You put on the tefillin in the hand
Yes,
first,
and then you take them off in reverse order.
reverse order.
Oh,
and
okay,
then,
okay.
then when you're finished,
Last one on is first one off.
Okay, got it.
Rabbi,
Yes, Jerry.
what happened to all those Jews who used to walk around all day long with the tefillin?
Yeah, there are still some who do. It's become a sign of exceptional piety, so much so that for all but the most learned people, it's considered like chutzpah.
Yes. I was gonna say
You're so from who do you think you are, right? So
But you
you don't
probably
see it very much anymore.
in Texas, you'd see it in Jerusalem, maybe. Right?
Maybe, and I mean, there are, I imagine that the Lubavitcher Rebbe might have worn tefillin during the day.
Well, you never seen the pictures.
Yeah, because he didn't wear them for show.
Interesting.
Right? Okay, it's 8:30. I got to say goodnight. Thank you all for being here. Feel
Thank
free to take a look at the rest of the text that you have on here. And if you have any questions or comments, just, feel free to shoot me an email.
Okay,
All right. Have a good night, everybody. Shabbat shalom.
Good night.
Ashley,
Shabbat
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.